And so think about, then finally 2021, last year we had more than $100 million in revenues, and we were profitable. And today, myself and Mattia, the other co-founders, still own more than 90% of the company. And we always decided to reinvest all the profits and into the business, and primarily in software, R&D, and then on the drug discovery.
Great.
Andrea, why don't we start with you? Why don't you start by just introducing Dante Labs to our audience? Tell us what you've built, how long you've been around.
Sounds great. So let me start by telling you a story about Angela. And Angela was born 25 years ago with an undiagnosed rare disease. And for 25 years, she saw doctors. She took traditional genetic tests that only analyze a few genes, but she was never able to receive a precise diagnosis. So Angela needed help, and Angela found Dante Labs. And at Dante, we took a completely different approach. We sequenced her whole genome, her entire DNA, and then we generated personalized reports based on her medical history. And so for the first time, after 25 years, we were able to provide Angela with a precise diagnosis. And she emailed us and she told us two things. The first one was thank you. And the second one was that she was doomed because her disease had no approved therapy. And so we realized that we had an extra duty of care of going from diagnostics into therapeutics. And we went back to our database, identified other patients with Angela's disease that we had sequenced their genomes. And the result is that today we have a drug candidate that we submitted to the European Medical Agency for orphan drug designation. So this is what we do. When we created Dante Labs now 6 years ago, our mission was and has been to accelerate science to save human lives. And we started by focusing on the whole genome, which is the most comprehensive genetic test that you can have by definition. And it's also the most challenging one. And so we really built Dante to be able to transform the raw data from all the sequencing machines into genomic information, which is both clinically validated and then actionable and able to have a real impact on people's lives, starting from patients with really a huge unmet need, such as rare disease patients, oncology patients, and so on.
You said you've been developing this company for the last 6 years. It occurs to me that the personal genomic sequencing market has really changed a lot in the last 6 years. So what's it been like to develop the product during that span while the market is evolving the way it is?
So when we first entered genomics, we didn't have a lab. We only had a few people in an office.
It was just Dante, no Dante's
just
lab.
Dante, no labs. And what we did, we sent samples outside. So we outsourced the sequencing. And that was an opportunity to work already a few years ago with different sequencing platforms, such as BGI, Illumina, Oxford Nanopore. And then when we internalized the sequencing, we kept having this agnostic approach to sequencing. And so we really focus on our R&D, and I would say the core of our company is really the Dante platform. There is the pillar of the software that we built it to achieve two goals. The first one, to be really platform agnostic, and so to work with different types of data and sequencing technologies, such as Illumina, BGI, also Oxford Nanopore, and PacBio. And so now we're really excited to see more sequencing players entering the market with new sequencing platforms, companies such as Ultima Genomics or Element Bioscience and so on. And then the second goal was also to build a platform, a software platform, not meant just to sequence a few genomes at a time, so not meant for the needs of the genomic industry a few years ago, but really meant for the future of whole genomes, which we haven't reached yet. But I think we are really accelerating, and we're really getting close to an inflection point where millions of people will sequence their genome every month, while today, on average, probably less than 1 million people sequence their genome every year.
Yeah.
And when we will have this explosion of genomic sequencing, we will also have an explosion of data. And then there will be the need of a platform to analyze all this data and to turn it into user-friendly, clinically validated, actionable reports. And this is really where we invested in all these years and why we built Dante Labs to be the company then able to provide all these types of answers and analysis to clinics, labs, and individuals and doctors all over the world.
In your initial story, you talked about how the data was just the beginning, that it actually led to the discovery of a clinical trial or a drug therapy option. I imagine you're probably, when you think about that acceleration from 1 million a year to millions per month, that must excite you in terms of the impact on clinical trials and therapy development. What are your thoughts there?
It does. For a long time, the traditional pharma industry has approached individuals, has approached the patients only at the clinical trial. All the work before, all the R&D is done in the labs. But I think genomics is really changing the landscape. And with the explosion, with the growth in genomic data, then there will be more and more available data of people with a certain disease. And in the future, I think we will have the most successful pharma companies will be companies that start from diagnostics. So they start with the patients, they start from genomic data, and then they use that data to accelerate and drive their drug discovery process. So it's really patient-driven and patient-centric approach. And so in the future, it will make total sense to have individuals and companies starting from diagnostics going to drug discovery.
Now, remind me, you may have mentioned this, but remind me how patients interact with Dante Labs. Am I able to order a personalized genomic testing kit, or do you work through providers? How does it work?
We do both. So we work from individuals to governments,
Okay.
Having private clinics and hospitals in the middle. With individuals, what happens is that they are able to buy a kit from our website. But then in the background, there is a doctor who is actually placing the order. So it's a doctor order test, genetic test. And then that doctor is also available for genetic counseling. Then we work also with clinics in the United States, North America, Europe, the Middle East, Asia. And we have always had a global approach. So in these 5 years, these 6 years of Dante, we have impacted lives in 97 different countries.
Wow.
We had people sequence their genomes from some islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where there is not even a hospital, or not even a clinic, not even a genetic sequencer, but they were able to get their genome sequenced thanks to Dante.
When normal people like me think about getting getting sequenced, they might think of a company like 23andMe. They might think about even Ancestry.com, where there's sort of a low understanding of the industry on the consumer side. And I wonder if you could help educate us and place yourself within sort of that competitive landscape.
Yes, as I think both Ancestry and 23andMe have been great pioneers and have really helped bringing the idea of home testing for genetics into the mind of consumers and also regulators and the general public. I think the number one difference between us and these companies and also a lot of traditional genetic companies is our very strong focus on the whole genome. And also, so if you think about traditional genetics, you buy or you take a test to answer a precise question. So with Ancestry, it's about your ancestry and genealogy. With 23andMe, it's about some wellness traits. But also standard genetic tests, such say a cardiology test, they're usually used to confirm a diagnosis of a doctor. With the genome, it's a completely different approach. So it's totally unbiased because you sequence everything. So you have a lot of data. And then it's also not something that you do just once. So you sequence your data, your sample once, but then you can access the data for your entire life. And anytime you have a question, you can inquire your genome. And I will give you an example. We have had this woman in Chicago, Jennifer. She sequenced her genome with us. And then a couple of years later, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, even if she was not predisposed to breast cancer. But when she was at the hospital and the doctor was about to pick a chemotherapy drug, she gave the doctor her pharmacogenomics report, And so the doctor was able to pick the right chemotherapy drug to exclude a drug where she would have had an adverse reaction. And so this is a great case of using the genome when you need it and having it with you, because the reality is that when you need it yesterday.
Yeah.
You are not in time to run it to get your sample sequencing. You're usually in a hospital, and maybe likely you will never need it.
Yeah.
It's like an insurance. And so we really see the genome to be an asset for life, while standard traditional genetic testing is more about individual transactions.
Interesting. Is a piece of that challenge educating physicians? You were talking about how Ancestry.com has helped consumers understand the concept of sequencing, but where are providers at in their understanding and appreciation that their patients could really use this as a tool?
It's a mix. You have some very early adopters. We see a lot of specialists, especially in the rare disease community, rare disease specialists that have understood and have used genomics, starting from whole exome, now switching to whole genome for years. You have some other players, some other healthcare systems in Europe, for instance, that are very slow in adopting genomics. And I will give you an example. So the BRCA1, BRCA2 test was invented in the mid-90s. Only very recently, this test has been introduced in the healthcare system of some Southern European countries. So that's something like 25 years ago. So in this 25 years gap, think about how many lives could have been saved if that test had been introduced very much earlier on.
Yeah.
But luckily, it's also changing. I think now governments are being more active. We have recently won a tender and a grant with the Italian government to introduce a whole genome sequencing test to be used in the Italian healthcare system, which we call the Dante Citizen test. We see other governments embracing population genomics for research, but also for clinical use. And we are also active with 2 small European countries to actually try to sequence their entire population, but really to then introduce genomics and integrate the genomic data with the healthcare system, with the standard healthcare.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about your traction. Part of the reason why I wanted to have this call is that you've really been successful at getting out to market. So Andrea, talk to me about just some of the milestones that you've been proud of over the last year in terms of the product being in the marketplace.
Yeah, so we started Dante, I would say, with limited financial resources. And so we are very focused on how we invested them. And we made the majority of the first investments into the software, because we realized that software was the one that would change the paradigm and really enable genomics to be available to the mass market and to provide actionable genomic information to people and to be able to automate a lot of processes that were still manual. Then in 2019, we internalized the sequencing, so we built our own sequencing lab. And in the sequencing lab, we also introduced the software to achieve operational excellence and really also to manage to provide answers to people in a shorter turnaround time, and also to really manage that excellence in terms of keeping the costs low. And then when COVID-19 hit in 2020, at the beginning, we thought COVID was something different from us. But then we realized we had the duty to help Italy, which was hit very bad by COVID. And we also realized we had the software capabilities and the platform to analyze thousands and then tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of COVID-19 samples and to provide interpretation results automatically to individuals, companies, governments. And so we realized that we had the duty and the capabilities, and so we expanded also into COVID testing, and that we enabled us to be successful. And at the time, we were surprised that some other companies in the space decided not to do anything, and they were in genomics, they were in healthcare, but they decided not to do anything in COVID, even if I think there was a huge unmet need. Yeah. And we were also surprised later on to see that some other companies that had expanded into COVID testing, they were not able to run those operations in a profitable way. So they were still burning a lot of cash. Well, with Dante, we have been profitable since 2018. And so let's think about, then finally 2021, last year we had more than $100 million in revenues and we were profitable. And we Today, myself and Mattia, the other co-founder, still own more than 90% of the company, and we always decided to reinvest all the profits and into the business, and primarily in software, R&D, and then on the drug discovery.
So the $100 million question is, why were you able to succeed where others failed? You said during COVID, some folks didn't really see the need, so they didn't even try to address it, but then others kind of faltered. They tried to get into the COVID space, or they tried to pivot one direction and then back, and it just didn't work. So why did it work for you?
I think there's really been a couple of elements. The first one has been the ability of integrating software into end-to-end solutions. So integrating software in diagnostic solutions, integrate software in the work of the lab. And that has allowed us to provide better benefits to people in terms of providing results and to individuals, let's say, far away, such as in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We have done COVID testing on board of cruise ships by connecting the cruise ships with our own centralized software. And then the second one has been really that, also, I would say, expertise and experience in operations and in logistics. So in, I would say, boring areas of science, and probably not really related to science, but very important where you are managing thousands and then hundreds of thousands of samples. And so in that way, we were able, on one side, to provide the solutions that was advantageous for the end customer and for the end user, and in parallel to develop and then commercialize these solutions quick and also in a cost-effective way.
Your note about taking less investment dollars. You said you own 90%. You and your partner own 90% of the company. You haven't diluted that over the years with multiple rounds, correct? It's timely advice, or timely to hear that at a time when, because of the sort of rocky public markets and the economic downturn, we're seeing a cooling off of investment, and a lot of startups are wondering, okay, what should my new strategy be? How should I think about my first few years of life if raising a big early round isn't really for me? So I wonder if, you entered into a market that was quite complex. You had to build your labs. It wasn't like it was, it didn't require resources. So I wonder if you have some strategic advice for an early stage founder who is realizing, maybe I need to focus a bit more on revenue, a bit more on my bottom line, and a little less on raising my next round. What are your thoughts?
So I would say, number one, focus on revenues and on building a product that people will buy. And then also limit the investments in where you can add a difference, and then stage the investments at when you have reached a capacity or a financial capability to make those extra investments. And I will give you our example. So if we had made the first investments in building a lab when we had no samples to sequence, then we would have an empty lab with very high fixed costs and also very high variable costs. We will just sequence a few samples per month. So we externalized the sequencing at the beginning, which cost us a little bit more instead of having internally, but then it allowed us to be more flexible, also to test different types of tests. In the beginning, we were also selling whole exome and panels, and then people kept buying the whole genome. We realized, okay, the whole genome is where we should go.
Yeah.
And then when we reached the sample volume to run a lab at full capacity, which is the only way to run a lab in a profitable way, then we decided to invest in the lab. And so I think the beauty today, I think, of the digital world is that you can measure also a lot. And so I would say another advice is measure the different investments in marketing, in operations. And today you can measure that. You can measure the return of a marketing campaign, a return of a new technology. But also I think it's important to be nimble and flexible. And then in terms of fundraising, I think it's important to work with investors who really share your same beliefs.
Yeah.
Because then they will be a partner with you, like, let's say, like a startup health, and then you will not have to fight with them to try to convince them to do something that they don't want to do.
Yeah. Is it also important? Has it been important for you? I'm going to venture a guess that it has been. So, how important has it been to your success to have a global perspective? I see on your website that you just, partnered with a group in the Emirates. You were from Italy. You talked about, working with countries all over the world. Why has that been key to your success?
It has been because it has enabled us to be unbiased and not to try to identify who our customers will be.
Explain what you mean by
Before,
that. Unbiased
so
about your customers.
so I see a lot of companies, also some of my friends, they launch a business, they launch a product, and they think that they have already identified who their target customers will be. And so let's say they only target universities, or they only target rare disease patients, or they only target oncology doctors, or they only target people in the United States or in certain markets. And for us, we thought, okay, no, let's see who will buy the tests. And also let's see what genetic tests they will buy. And so our first customers was from Latvia and in Eastern Europe, which is a very small country, and if doesn't rank at the top of the countries for highest GDP.
Right.
So if we had to, but the reason was that we opened our website to the entire world, and so we waited to see where customers will come from.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, we have customers from some very remote islands in the middle of nowhere, and also from some very remote villages in some countries, like even the United States. And so instead of just
Now, just to
targeting New
pause you
York
for a
and
second,
LA,
just to pause you for a second, plenty of companies can open up a website and just hope that a market emerges from somewhere. So how did you connect those dots? You can't just assume that someone will find you from Latvia. So how did you succeed at casting such a broad marketing umbrella?
so that's where you need to measure your marketing investments and start running experiments online on different platforms. Facebook, Google, also like LinkedIn, also other platforms today, and then also change and vary your strategies, starting from a small budget and then increasing your budgets in the areas where you see that your marketing strategies are working well. So that I think that comes more from my experience at Amazon. So I'm the non-scientific co-founder. So and I was at Amazon before starting Dante Labs, and so that that idea of having a global approach and measuring everything, and also being nimble in your investments, that really came from Amazon.
This is
But
starting
yeah,
to make more sense now as I think you have a very sophisticated approach to direct to consumer marketing. Your understanding of things like Facebook and Google, and figuring out who your target market is, because there's plenty of folks in health innovation that might have a great idea and they might not put the investment and time into that piece, into really testing marketing channels to figure out, okay, what's going to work in what region, et cetera. I mean, it's a very complex sort of problem to solve.
true. And that same strategy works also with hospitals and doctors and researchers, because people go online and different
Yeah.
types of people go online.
Can I ask what the most successful channels were for you? You talked about Facebook, Google, other channels. If there's another company in our portfolio listening to this who's doing direct to consumer, any little advice or strategies would be helpful.
Yes, I would say also some offline partnerships were very successful. Some of those areas that are called offline under the belt marketing strategies, like even mail in some countries, like specific mail to some companies and clinics. And then I think online, it's important to always adapt and change your strategy. What we have seen is that what worked a couple of years ago doesn't work anymore today, and the opposite. So you always have to adapt and try the new platforms. We will launch something like a new product on the metaverse in the next few months.
Okay.
Now the metaverse
How
is
do you stay up to date?
you have to engage with people outside of the industry,
Yeah.
And they who were more, let's say, on the marketing, you're more active on marketing. There are some sectors, I would say, early adopters on new technologies and platforms. As well as you have to be up in software, you have to engage with people outside the genomic industry who are really advanced in software, such as AI, autonomous driving vehicles, and so on. So I think it's important to and also in genomics, honestly, like talking with people with a background in physics is very helpful to think about solutions for genomic problems.
What would be your advice to a founding team, earlier stage than yourself, that doesn't have someone with a strong marketing background on the team? There's someone who's great in finance, someone who's great with the science, the healthcare side, but maybe there's no one on the team yet who really gets the piece that you just described.
I think it's today you should do a test. You should start learning about marketing and become a small expert, because it's easy to hire an agency, but then you need to control that agency and manage it. Or you could hire an expert, but you need to be able to understand about marketing to work with real marketing experts. So I think it's to study will be so that you can build a first layer of knowledge and marketing knowledge that then will enable you to be more effective when you spend money on a campaign with a marketing agency when you hire a team.
Nice. All right. Last question is the forward-looking question. You said 100 million in revenue this last year. That's amazing. It's very impressive. So my question is, what are you going to do with that? What comes next for Dante Labs?
So in terms of what we're going to do next, keep growing, expand in the United States, also pushing our drug discovery program, keep investing in software. Now, I think it's also the right time for us to start looking for a strong institutional investor who believes in our story and where we really share some beliefs, because we have reached that maturity where I think we can welcome such an investor, and then really start keep impacting people around the world, and looking forward to the inflection point in genomics with millions of people getting sequenced every month.
Who would be the ideal partner, institutional investor or otherwise?
It's investor which is on healthcare, but also in tech, so that understand the value of technology, including software in healthcare, and it's not just about the biology and the science.
Very nice. Well, I think that's the time we have for today. Andrea, Laura, I appreciate you joining me today. It's really exciting to see the way that you're impacting people's lives through this type of technology, this sequencing. So I'm excited to see what you do next and how you leverage this success you had this year.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
All right. Take care. Be well.
You too. Thank you.
A quick word about this show, in case you're new around here. At Startup Health, we believe in broadcasting the stories of health moonshot progress, the stories of the most forward-thinking entrepreneurs in health. If you want more of this good news about healthcare's problem solvers, make sure that you subscribe to our channel, hit that notification button, and follow us on social media at Startup Health.